Let's take a look at another theorem, the congruent supplements theorem. This theorem states that if two angles are supplements to the same angle, or congruent angles, then the two angles are congruent. Let's take a look at it in a figure. If angle 1 and angle 2 are supplements, so these two angles are supplements, and angle 1 and angle 3 are supplements, so those two angles are supplements, then angle 2 is congruent to angle 3. Do you believe me? Well, let's prove it. First, we need to identify what we are given and what we need to prove. As we learned a few lessons ago, what we are given is the hypothesis of our conditional. So our hypothesis is two angles are supplements to the same angle. What we are trying to prove is the conclusion to our conditional. And our conclusion says that the two angles are congruent. Now, once again, the hypothesis and the conditional are extremely general. So something that's going to help us out quite a bit is if we have a figure. So let's take a look at this figure here. Notice that we have two angles, angle 2 and angle 3, and they're going to be supplementary to angle 1. So instead of having this two angles are supplementary to the same angle, let's name the angles. So let us say angle 2 is supplementary to angle 1, and angle 3 is supplementary to angle 1. Instead of simply saying the two angles are congruent, let's once again name those angles. So we want to say those two angles, angles 2 and angle 3, are congruent. So now instead of having a general statement, we have a very specific statement about the angles, and it'll be easier to prove that way. Now, something that we're going to do with this proof that is going to be a little bit different is we're going to do what is called a paragraph proof. A lot of people like doing paragraph proofs because it allows them to just write down ideas in sentences the way they think. Let's start it off the way we would start off any proof, the given. So we can say we are given that angle 2 is supplementary to angle 1 and angle 3 is supplementary to angle 1. Now let's build on the idea of supplementary. The definition of supplementary angles tells us that the measure of angle 2 plus the measure of angle 1 total to 180 degrees. That also tells us that the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 1 has to equal 180 degrees. So notice what I'm doing is I'm just writing this down as I'm thinking through it. That's what a paragraph proof is. Now I'm looking at this, and I'm noticing that I have something here that equals 180 degrees. And 180 degrees equals something else. Another way to think about that is A equals B, and B equals C. Doesn't that sound an awful lot like something else that we already know? Namely, the transitive property. So we can say that the transitive property tells us that the measure of angle 2 plus the measure of angle 1, so that's our A, that has to equal our C, which is the measure of angle 3 plus the measure of angle 1. I'm noticing that we're actually almost done here. Because if we take this equation that we just created right here, and we subtract the measure of angle 1 from both sides of that equation, then we'll be pretty much done. So the subtraction property of equality tells us that the measure of angle 2 has to equal the measure of angle 3. Well, wait a minute. If the angle measures are equal, then the definition of congruent angles tells us that angle 2 is congruent to angle 3. Because the definition of congruent angles tells us if angle measures are the same, then the angles are congruent. And we're done. Notice that a two-column proof and a paragraph proof do the same thing. It's just that a paragraph proof is more of a conversation, more of a thought process, and for a lot of people, it's easier to write out their thoughts than it is to put it into 2 columns. So this is another way you can do your proofs if you'd like.